This is the Game Changers Experience. Deep dive conversations with leading business disruptors, Olympic athletes, celebrities, entrepreneurs, and influencers from around the world. This show will teach you insights about the winning principles in mindset, productivity, marketing, branding, entrepreneurship, business strategy, and more. Hosted by Productivity Authority, business strategist, former elite athlete, author, and public speaker, Adam Strong.
And look at the camera.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Game Changers Experience with myself, Adam Strong. And I'm here today with a lady called Nancy Mayer. Now, Nancy is a business advisor, profit strategist, innovation coach, and the founder of Power, Play, and Profit. Nancy's specialism is about developing strategic plans and building highly effective advisory boards that accelerate growth and secure funding. Oh, I think this is absolutely crucial and really interesting because I know that Nancy's been, we've been having some great conversations actually offline, because some of you may or may not, I'm also starting up another startup company, which is all in the ocean plastic space. Some of you may or may not know. If you'd like to know a bit more information, of course, you can also go to my LinkedIn profile and check that out. But some of the things that we're going to be talking about today's topics is we're going to be talking about some of the biggest mistakes that maybe some of the clients that when Nancy comes into contact with, what are some of the biggest mistakes that trying to avoid, and some of the things that you need to try to avoid when you're thinking about advisory boards. We're also going to be talking about what actually is an advisory board in terms of characteristics, personalities. We're looking at how to build one and why is it so important to build an advisory board, right? So that's super important. We're also going to be talking a little bit about the framework and the methodology about how to recruit an advisory board. Because I tell you what, I know for a fact it's so crucial to make sure that you've got the right advisors and the right advisory board on, especially when you're in start phase, or if you're in tech or fintech or whatever it might be. So crucially important to surround yourself with who you become. And listen, it's not cliche, it's totally true. So listen, without further ado, Nancy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adam. So happy to be here.
Likewise, it's great to have you. And it's interesting because firstly, I want to say thanks so much for some of the connections that you've and also your advice as well around some of the things that we're working on in our startup. So I just want to say thanks very much for that.
Well, I love mentoring startups, and there's so many amazing ideas, and I'm there to serve. And yeah, we're going to dig into some secret weapons that many people are not using, and if they do use, make sure that they do it right.
Absolutely. And and I know, I mean, some of the things that you've been working on, especially when it comes to startups, I mean, you've done some stuff in Silicon Valley, haven't you, with startups, and worked with numerous companies and things like that. What are some of the companies that you really love working with? Or is there anyone in particular that kind of springs to mind?
A lot of the mentoring that I do is through venturecapital.org, Keiretsu Forum, which is the largest angel investor network, Boom Startups, different accelerators. So all the different ideas, all the different founders, mentoring them, helping them. And with a lot of these groups, what I find is really fascinating, and it kind of supports the idea of an advisory board, and that is the magic that happens when you get 6 or 7 people from different backgrounds helping a founder with a very specific challenge. Many times that's like helping them build their pitch deck and getting them ready for their first big pitch in front of a group of investors, and like understanding, what investors are looking for, because your pitch deck will have many different versions. Your initial pitch deck is just to get the conversation, but you're going to have an investor's deck, and you're going to have a marketing deck, and you're going to have a sales deck. So, I mean, some of the things that I've seen that I really like and that I talk a lot about is when you're building your business, have a slide for every single key idea. And then you can roll it up or roll it down, but depending on who you're talking to, you can shuffle the deck. And that allows you to work smarter, not harder. And you've actually lost none of your information, because in the olden days, like, we would have to take a business plan and edit it and this, that, and the other thing. This way, it's I kind of follow the idea of Nancy Duarte from Slide Docs. I know we talked a little bit about that. And that's when you're giving a presentation, you have a narrative picture. And when you have a document, you've got a lot of words. And the nice thing is, especially for your investor deck, when you can put those two together, it makes it easier to read and easier for people to get the idea quickly.
Love it. Love it. Some very cool stuff. All right. Well, listen, let's get straight into this. I was going to ask you, actually, I mean, you've been doing this for the best part of a quarter of a century, 25 years and things like that. But prior to that, were you, I mean, how did it come about? Was you kind of more working in corporate America, then transition into more advisory? I'd love to know more about the background before that.
Actually, I'm a serial entrepreneur. Started in the entertainment, music, film, television, got into event management, conferences. Then I was in a not-for-profit and literally helped them go from 600,000 to 1.3 million in donations in less than 10 years, just by using strategies. So I just always thought very strategically. Then I got into software development, and through software development, really happened upon some phenomenal strategic tools, one of them being the business model canvas. Got to work very closely with Alexander Osterwalder and his team and launched their second book, Value Proposition Design. So I really love visual thinking. And I also got a chance to work with Luke Holman from Innovation Games. So I became more of a facilitator, and that led me to do quite a bit of strategic planning with the Business Development Bank of Canada, which is an investment bank for entrepreneurs, and got to work with some really cool companies. But I love helping people uncover their own ideas. Like, I don't want to do it for them. I want to teach them how to fish. I don't want to fish for them. Yeah. And some of my greatest joys are those aha moments when people understand, oh, that's who my customer target is, that's bringing me the most benefit, and here's my value proposition, and then making those pivots, and then integrating them into their strategy, and then helping them with the actual implementation.
Love it. Love it. Very cool. Awesome. So listen, I kind of like my thoughts are, I'd love to know more about kind of, what do you think in terms of, like, especially when people come to you prior to a particular challenge or a problem, whether it be a startup company or whatever it is. But what do you feel, I mean, in terms of like the minds of those clients, or the clients that have come to you for advice, for example, what are some of the biggest mistakes that they're trying to avoid? And especially when it maybe around sort of advisory boards, how do you kind of, like, I don't know, not twist their arm, but kind of convince them that, actually, do you know what, have you got these things in place, because you're going to need these things in place? I mean, I'd love to know more about what your thoughts are about that.
Well, there was a fascinating statistic from the Business Development Bank of Canada that less than 6% of small to medium-sized businesses have formalized advisory boards. And the ones that do are seeing triple the amount of revenues, double the amount of productivity. And when you put those two together, that's a huge impact on their profitability. And then when you have a startup, there is also an increase in your valuation based on association. But what I found is that a lot of founders are just going after names for the association component and not actually bringing them together around a table, properly prepared to help them with their biggest business challenges at the moment. So, instead of spending 2 to 3 hours on a one-on-one mentor relationship, you can spend those same 3 hours with everybody together. And that's where the magic really happens. And, and it becomes a win-win-win, because the founder wins because they get invaluable advice that they'd never otherwise get. They compress timelines, they eliminate costly mistakes, and they increase their own circle of influence, which then increases their ecosystem of investors as well. So, if they are working with an angel group or a venture capital, that person could be on their advisory board, but I really believe that people should be pulling their advisors from their own network, because those are the people that want to help, and they'll do it because they want to do it and they want you to succeed, as opposed to doing it for money. Because that's one of the tricks to having a highly effective advisory board, where you get a huge ROI, because you're not paying people for their advice, you're bringing them together to help you. And it's a big difference.
Yep. And I think that, especially from a founder's perspective, especially in the startup world, one of the things that they're so conscientious is obviously cash flow and money, because, some companies, a lot of companies can't even make a single dime, in the first couple of years. I mean, Amazon took freaking 20 years before they even made a single dime before they profit, because they just reinvested in the business. Right. So I think you made a really good point there. So that's cool. Very good.
The other cool thing that I've seen quite a bit is some of these super successful people actually start pitching in and take a temporary role. So when you don't have a lot of money, and it's amazing, some of the things that I've seen. And when they see you implementing a lot of their ideas and you putting it into their strategy, then they become even more vested. And then the fascinating thing is your company then becomes their topic of conversation when they're at the water fountain. So
100%.
I think it's great.
Do you think it's also, like, from your perspective, do you feel like it's also a limiting belief sometimes in founders of startup companies? Because initially the first thing they're thinking of is, oh crap, how much is this going to cost me? Right. And I think there's this kind of fine line between advisory boards and, say, getting coaching or mentoring. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like this first thing is, holy crap, how am I going to afford this? That's probably maybe a limiting belief. What's your take on that?
Well, I think the first issue is that they go, oh, board, and they just think board of directors. They don't understand the difference between a board of directors. Yes, they're probably going to have a board of directors at some point of time,
right?
And an advisory board. And all the horror stories of founders being kicked out by their board of directors. So it's first understanding what it is and what it isn't. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's the purpose. I mean, that's the very first fundamental thing. And funding is important, but also it could be access, it could be advice, because sometimes it's that one connection that makes all the difference. That you would never get your foot in the door, but that person knows that person. Therefore, it's a game changer.
Yep, love it. Pardon the pun, as we say. Love it.
I wanted to squeeze that in there somewhere.
Absolutely, 100%. So, okay, so let's get some context, because I know we've been talking about advisory boards, but for the people that are maybe a little bit inexperienced or maybe don't know what advisory board is, what is an advisory board? I'm not talking about the Wikipedia English dictionary version of an advisory board, but your version of what an advisory board is. And what do advisory boards bring in terms of value? I mean, what's the point?
Well, that's why I believe you need to be super strategic and intentional about building your advisory board. Where do you need advice? So first thing is, again, the purpose. Do you need funding? Do you need access? Or do you need advice? And all companies usually need all three, but let's prioritize, because that'll make a difference. Then do a bit of a SWOT, like your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. What's going on in the marketplace, and where within your company do you need the most help? So then I recommend actually building categories whether it's funding, do you need someone who can help you spin up a funding vehicle? Do you need someone who can help you build a data room? I mean, there's all sorts of funding categories. There's also some business categories like operations, marketing. There's, and then there's access categories, and there's advice categories. So pick 7 or 8 key categories, then start brainstorming who do you know that would fill that role. And then I recommend, if you can, get 5 to 6 people and then prioritize them based on their experience, their expertise, and their contacts. Now, if in your personal network you have one linchpin that you know other people want to be around the table, that's strategically the first person that you invite. Now, the invitation is also very important because these, you want to have a little mini pitch deck. Why them? Why you? Why now? And also set out very clearly the expectations, because these super successful people want to give back. They really do, but they want to do it in a way that's somewhat controlled. So if you can set expectations like, okay, this is going to be 1 3-hour in-person meeting. We're going to bring you in. We're going to have a great dinner. We're going to have a 3-hour morning meeting. We're going to have a great lunch or go out and play golf or something. And maybe 2 telephone calls and 1 virtual meeting. That's a lot easier for someone to say yes to. And then there's also a little bit about compensation. And very often people will offer some equity. It's not a big piece of equity. And the other thing about equity, I would have you have it vested over a certain amount of time, tied to key milestones so that these people get involved, right? Because far too often I've seen people give equity for that association thing that we talked about, and they actually don't add value. So there, if you do it right, you can ensure that every advisor is giving the greatest value that they have within the time frame that you've and the expectations that you set. Then the next thing about really adding value is to prepare them properly. Come up with 1 to 3 challenge statements. What do we want to solve? What's your biggest problem? Let's come in with a game plan and reverse engineer the meeting so that you can get the outcomes that you're looking for. So
very cool. I love that, and it's given me I love having these types of conversations, because sometimes what tends to happen is I ended up having an aha moment. I think that's really important to set expectations, but also I think that especially when you want to take someone on board as part of the advisory team, if you like to call them an advisory team,
it really is an external team. And it's one of the worst managed teams. You've got management teams, you've got product teams, you've got project teams, you've got all your different teams, but people don't really think of being more strategic and intentional with their external team.
And I think that you picked up a really good point as well. Is kind of, and I'll give you an example, right? So we had a lady that applied for a position with us for our ocean plastic initiative, for example. And listen, I loved the lady. I think she was fantastic. She'd fit the perfect role, whatever it is. But it was only a short period of time where she's like, hey, so I love what you do, but the thing is that I've also got another opportunity, and I don't want to kind of be hanging around. I was like, listen, that's cool with me as all. But one of the things that came to my mind from what you're just saying is, hey, if she is that valuable, maybe I could bring her in as advisor, right? And, because I think that she could add some huge amounts of value, and then it wouldn't take up so much of her time, because I really do believe that probably suit her better than what I propose. So, hey, that's a really good aha moment. So I just want to share that.
Well, also, I mean, you have a strategic advisory board, which is kind of what we've been talking about. Right. But you also have a customer advisory board. And in a way, I know that your new project would be kind of like a not-for-profit. So there's a not-for-profit, and I find not-for-profit advisory boards, you can also build committees and allow people to give back in a much more structured way. And I find very often not-for-profits I don't want to say desperate, but they're just not intentional enough. Just if anybody wants to help out, they go, yeah, sure, but they don't have the right structure. So I think, yeah, that would be an awesome opportunity, because I know she's obviously very committed.
Well, I know that, by the way, for full disclosure, my initiative is for profit, but I know, and
Okay.
I totally get, like, from, especially from people that are listening in, potentially, if you have a non-for-profit or you run a charity or whatever like this, you know what, it doesn't matter because the fundamentals don't change. So I just want to put that out. Anyway, what was going to say, interestingly enough, when it comes, I mean, you've kind of touched some bits and pieces on the value a advisory board can bring to the business or the initiative or whatever it is, or the idea, whatever it is that you want to create or whatever it is. In terms of like looking for the right advisor that fits a particular role, whether it is to whether it's to solve a particular challenge or a particular problem, what is it that we need to look for in individuals? And it could be, I don't know, whatever it might be, certain behaviors, certain patterns, it's certain experience. What is it that you would advise and say, do you know what, this person would be good suited for you? And the reason for that is because of whatever it might be. It could be their experience or whatever it might be. What's your thoughts on that? What's your take?
So my advice is to build an actual war room with those categories, 5 to 6 people in each category, prioritize them based on, first of all, how much they love you, or how much interest they've shown in, really wanting to help you. And then, like I said, their experience, their expertise, their contacts, and then start going down the list in each category. So I think most people don't think about the strategic categories of advice, access, or funding, but that would be where I would start. And the second piece is, if you can keep it within your network, or even if you have a team of people, maybe you do actually have a board of directors, bring them together for a brainstorming session of who knows who that has these qualities, because I think that will give you the clarity. Because as you know, manifestation is the easy part. Figuring out what you want is the hard part. So if you can really get clear on what the job to be done, or what the advice that you need is before you start choosing the people, I think you'll be far farther ahead.
Very cool. Love it. Very good. Now, interestingly enough, I know that you've got your book, which is the Advisory Board Playbook, which is kind of cool. Now, in your book, if I'm not mistaken, you've created a 5-step methodology or a framework to help create the advisory board methodology, if you want to call it that. Tell us a little bit more about the framework. How should people go about in terms of like execution?
So number one, we talk a little bit about purpose. Yep. What is the purpose of your advisory board? And that goes right through to a not-for-profit. What's the purpose? Funding, advice, access. Then who are the players? And we've kind of gone through the step-by-step of creating a war room and prioritizing who's going to add the greatest value, who's there for the right reasons. Something that I would advise is that outside consultants that you're working with, your lawyers, your accountants, and people like that, probably you don't want them on your advisory board, because they might have ulterior motives and not give you the kind of advice that you truly need. Then it's the preparation. So, give them your pitch deck, your financials, but more importantly, this is one of the secret sauces, is what are your challenge statements, so that they are prepared to walk into the meeting. The fourth step is planning. And especially when you're doing a super high level strategic advisory board, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you figure out a way to bring in a professional facilitator. Because as a founder, you need to be sitting at that table with those people as their peer and listening and being 1,000% present, because you are probably not an expert at facilitating a meeting. So that's one of my areas of expertise. And depending on what the challenges are, there's very many different exercises or games or facilitation techniques to get those desired outcomes. So actually the third part of the book, I go through all sorts of facilitation, from visual thinking, design thinking, gamification, facilitation, preparation, all that stuff. But that's really important, is the planning, from the outcomes, and reverse engineering the meeting so that it's engaging, it's fun. And here's the key part. You are listening 80% and only talking 20%, because far too often I've seen founders go in, PowerPoint, PowerPoint, PowerPoint. Whoa, what do you guys think? You know, they spend all this money and they get no value. So, and then the fifth one is performance. So have a strategy in place on how you're going to continue to keep them updated. I think your advisory board needs to be a little more intimate, a little more consistent than your quarterly newsletter to your potential investors, right? Because that's something that, you know, is really important as you're building your list of people who might want to invest, you know, like keeping them updated on what's going on. But I think you need to reach out in a different way, much more intimate way, to your advisors, and let them know how you've taken their ideas and you're actually implementing them in your strategy. And then they become even more vested, and they are going to open their contact list. I was going to say Rolodex, but and their pocketbooks, because they see you actually taking their advice and implementing it. And that's huge.
Love it. Very cool. Love it. Very good. So now I know that you mentioned around board meetings, but we could just use meetings in general, because I know for a fact that so many companies have meetings just for the sake of bloody meetings, if you want to call it that, right? And the big problem, and it's interesting, it doesn't matter which organization you're part of, right? And I don't know if you've ever been in meetings which have just gone hours and hours on end, and half the time it's like, well, that was a waste of time. But talk to us a little bit more about how we can create meetings which are more strategic and more kind of organized, I suppose, and something which is kind of like, how do you create strategic board meetings which have purpose, which have fun, which have collaboration written all over it? What's your thoughts on that?
So again, you could almost use those same 5 Ps. What's the purpose of the meeting? Who are the players that need to be at the meeting? And don't bring in people that don't need to be there, you know. Right. Then make sure that they're properly prepared, so you can come in and you're going to be solving a very specific problem at that time. And then design the meeting so that you get the outcomes that you're looking for. So you know, whether it's your agenda, I personally like very interactive things. Some things that kind of throw people off and they're not expecting, because when people are playing, their biases come down and you get all sorts of great ideas. So, you know, if it's an innovation type meeting where you want to come up with a different new ideas, and I have different kind of innovation games. I use innovation, and there's I would talk some of the resources that I would recommend. Liberating Structures is a fantastic website that's got all sorts of facilitation. Some of the other ones, like Creative Problem Solving Institute, has a whole series. And what I really like in that is a lot of this is like divergent thinking, coming up with tons and tons and tons of ideas. Very often I'll start with a silent storm. So I just give people stickies and allow them to put their ideas down. And then we start putting them on the wall, because I really think you need to get it out of your head and onto the wall so that you have a shared language and a shared understanding. And then you can cluster things, name things, and solve things in a more productive way. But it's also very interactive. And the reason I like silent storming is because it allows those people who aren't necessarily similarly, who might be more introverted, it gives them an equal opportunity to put stuff up there. And then it's really fun when people start putting up their stickies and talking and blah, 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 blah. So with the customer advisory boards, I do use a lot of innovation games. There's like discovery games where you can uncover the number one problem that if you fix would give you, the biggest bang for the buck. There's shaping games where you get the customer to help you prioritize what drives the highest value for them. And then there's really fun prioritization games where one in particular, I love buy a feature, especially I do this a lot with a lot of tech companies, but the next 2 or 3 features that you want to release, t-shirt size them based on how expensive it will be to develop it. And then give them an arbitrary number, like a small might be $5, extra large, $25, add it all up. And then you give them money, but not enough money to buy everything, about 45% of the full budget. And they will tell you really quickly. Now, the fun thing about gamification, and we can talk about that a little bit because you are a game changer, is that once they get that dopamine release, so when they buy something virtually, they want to replicate that feeling. So when you actually put that feature into the marketplace, it increases their propensity to buy.
Love it. Very cool. And I mean, gamification is well, for me, I feel like it's a completely different topic, and it's kind of like it's one of those things that's very much hot topics right now. But we'll park that for the time being. But I do have something else that I have to ask you, because if I'll just kind of like randomly put it out there. But if you're a founder, whether you are in pre-seed, seed, Series A funding, whatever it might be, and generally pre-seed funding, generally you're targeting angel investors, whereas maybe Series A funding, maybe venture capitalists or whatever it might be. But in terms of where strategic advisors or an advisory board, at what level do investors in particular expect you to have an advisory board in place? At what point of the funding? Is it right at the beginning? I mean, what's your take on that?
Oh, that's an interesting one. And that's where, you talk to a lot of venture capitalists and angel investors, whether it's Silicon Valley, Silicon Slopes, and, they see a lot of pitch decks with just a picture. This is our advisory board. And they question, are these people really adding value? So, in the earlier stages, it might be the one-on-one mentorship, but I still believe that the magic and the value comes when you bring them all together. So if you have early stage, lots of people wanting to help you out, just bring them together. I think it's a better use of your time, a better use of their time. And that magic happens when they're all together, solving a challenge, because that's fun for people, right? Like, and then if the actual experience is fun, then it's so much easier to bring them back in, and they really become vested, because far too often it's like I say, oh, so-and-so was helping me, and they're just going, really? So I don't know if that answered your question. I guess it also depends on when you're comfortable, but I do, as you know, entrepreneurship can be very, very lonely. And there's so many people out there that want to give back. And if you can structure it in such a way that it's fun, it's the set expectations, you will be amazed how many people say yes. Just like, even you don't even have to, like, just your first meeting, sometimes you don't even have to offer any kind of equity. Just say, can you come to a meeting? You've been so helpful. I want to make this productive. And if you can show that you're thoughtful of them and you're also helping to create a fun experience. And once again, if you do have the linchpin that other people want to sit around the table, because I think that's the other win that we didn't really get to, and that's advisors get to see how other advisors think, and then that puts them together. Because with a lot of the mentoring that, like I say, I do with venturecapital.org and everything, it's so cool because I've met so many great people. I see things very differently, and I don't see the same financial or investment. I kind of see more the strategy side, and it's just great.
Love it. Very cool. Well, listen, I know that we're coming towards the end of our conversation, and it's been really fascinating to listen to some of the things that we've been talking about, because it is a very specific topic. Advisory boards, it's something that it's something that we haven't really spoken about on the podcast, which is kind of cool. And I think it's really crucially important, especially when you are raising investment or looking to potentially grow the business or grow a business of some sort or whatever it might be. So just want to say thanks very much for that. Really appreciate it. What do you, I mean, I always like to ask kind of this question to our guests is, what are you working on right now? And what's the best way for some of our listeners to get maybe in touch with you?
Well, I'm, out there building advisory boards and helping all sorts of startups, especially I've originally from Toronto, Canada. Now I'm down here in Silicon Slopes, just north of Salt Lake City. And I've been doing some strategic plans, and I use a lot of these same techniques, the visual thinking, the design thinking, let's prototype your business idea. Don't fall in love with your first idea because it might not be the best one, and the whole gamification. So I've been starting to hold advisory board introduction meetings, which has been really fun. And I guess you can get me on LinkedIn is probably the best. That's
cool.
Nancy Mayer 13 LinkedIn, or PowerPlay PS for profitsolutions.com.
Very cool. And for you guys that want to connect with Nancy, by the way, we'll put the links below just in case you missed any of that. And when you do reach out to her, if you reach out to her, of course, and drop her a personal message, please do mention the podcast, because then you can kind of put two and two together. And so, Nancy, I just want to say thanks so much for being on the show today. Really appreciate your time.
Well, I thank you so much, Adam, and I look forward to continuing to collaborate on some amazing ideas. I just love cleaning up the oceans. I think it's super important.
Absolutely. Well, listen, guys, hope you've enjoyed today's conversation with myself and Nancy. And hopefully, well, if you haven't already done so, if you love our show, please do me a favor. Give us a 1 or a 5-star review. I always love honest reviews, by the way. Give us a 1 or a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, whichever your preferred podcast provider. Normally Apple and Spotify and Podchaser are the only ones that you can actually put a review on. But listen, the more reviews that we have, the better it is, and the bigger the impact for us. So listen, hope you've enjoyed today's show. And from myself and Nancy, we'll see you again back on the next Game Changers Experience. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Cheers now.
Bye.
Hey guys, I just want to say thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I would love to hear from you guys. Please do me a favor, like this video, subscribe to this channel, and click on the notification bell button below so that you don't miss out on some of the episodes that we've got coming up. Also, please make a comment in the comment section below. We are reaching out to some of our listeners so that we can get an understanding about how we can personalize some of the great content that we got coming out based on your needs and aspirations. My other word of advice as well is to go to our amazing Facebook community where you can meet other creative entrepreneurs and business owners. Introduce yourself, say hi, mention about some of the amazing breakthroughs that you're getting through some of the episodes, and network, right? Grow your business. You are with who you become with the 5 most common people you hang around with. So listen, guys, hope you enjoyed today's episode. We'll see you on the next episode. Take care and see you soon. Bye-bye.